mantras of our Lord Sri Aurobindo. Our Lord Sri Aurobindo says the true love for the divine is self-giving, free of demand, full of submission and surrender. It makes no claim, imposes no condition, strikes no bargain, indulges in no violences of jealousy, pride or anger, for these things are not in its composition. With always our love and blessing, says our Lord Sri Aurobindo. Words of our Lord Sri Aurobindo, taken from the collective works of our Lord Sri Aurobindo, book Letters on Yoga, Volume 4, Part 4, Difficulties in the Practice of Integral Yoga, Chapter 4, Resistances, Sufferings and Falls, Subtopic, Resistances in Sadhana. Our Lord Sri Aurobindo says, there are always these resistances in the sadhana. It is because the world is full of forces that don't want men to find the divine. Let me repeat. Our Lord Sri Aurobindo says there are always these resistances in sadhana. It is because the world is full of forces that don't want men to find the divine. Even the rishis of all times used always to be obstructed and disturbed until they conquered desire, anger, and all else and became full of the divine. The resistance is not always an intentional one. It is the resistance of the nature, the mind's personal ideas and preferences, the vital's desires, attachments, depressions, revolts, egoistic insistences on its own ways, and freedom to follow its inclinations and fancies, the physical promise, want of faith, inertia. These things are parts of human nature. The force comes to change them, but if the sadhak accepts these things, justifies them, or simply allows them to hold his consciousness without reacting, then their resistance, which is always there, can last a long time. Your proposed remedy would be no remedy at all. One has to go forward, not backward, to some old starting point. It is a wrong idea to get disgusted with doing the right thing because you can't do it absolutely now. It has to be done by a progressive movement. In everyone, there is something that resists until the ignorant parts of the being are transformed. That is no reason for giving up. It is sufficient if there is something behind that feels and can respond, even if it is very much covered by the obscure external nature. Our Lord Sri Aurobindo says, it is that in you which feels the force above the head and the atmosphere of quietness, and it is through that it will be done, whatever the amount of the external resistance. What you feel coming across the meditation is a resistance in the subconscious material, throwing up a thing like the cold or a nervous unrest or a causeless uneasiness. They must be, of course, be dismissed. When this part opens to the pressure from above, then these things are felt no more. Our Lord Sri Aurobindo says to break and rebuild is often necessary for the change, but once the fundamental consciousness has come, there is no reason why it should be done with trouble and disturbance. It can be done quietly. It is the resistance of the lower parts that brings in trouble and disturbance. There is no invariable rule of such suffering. It is not the soul that suffers, the self is calm and equal to all things, and the only sorrow of the psychic being is the sorrow of the resistance of nature to the divine will, or the resistance of things and people to the call of the true, the good, and the beautiful. Lord Sri Aurobindo says, what is affected by suffering is the vital nature and the body. When the soul draws towards the divine, when the soul draws towards the divine, there may be a resistance in the mind, and the common form of that is denial, doubt, which may create mental and vital suffering. There may again be a resistance in the vital nature whose principal character is desire and attachment to the objects of desire. And if in this field there is a conflict between the soul and vital nature, between the divine attraction and the pull of the ignorance, then obviously there may be such suffering of the mind and vital parts. The physical consciousness also may offer a resistance which is usually that of a fundamental inertia and obscurity in the very stuff of the physical, an incomprehension, an inability to respond to the higher consciousness, a habit of helplessly responding to the lower mechanically, even when it does not want to do so. Both vital, physical suffering may be the consequence. Lord Sri Aurobindo says, there may again be a resistance in the vital nature whose principal character is desire and the attachment to the objects of desire, and if in this field there is a conflict between the soul and the vital nature, between the divine attraction and the pull of the ignorance, then obviously there may be suffering of the mind and vital parts. The physical consciousness may also offer a resistance, which is usually that of a fundamental inertia and obscurity in the very stuff of the physical, an incomprehension, inability to respond to the higher consciousness, a habit of helplessly responding to the lower mechanically, even when it is done, want to do so, both vital and physical suffering may be the consequence. There is, moreover, the resistance of the universal nature, which does not want the being to escape from the ignorance into the light. This may take the form of a vehement insistence on the continuation of the old movements, waves of them thrown on the mind and vital and body, so that old ideas, impulses, desires, feelings, responses continue even after they are thrown out and rejected, and can return like an invading army from outside until the whole nature given to the divine refuses to admit them. And Lord Sri Aurobindo says this is the subjective form of universal resistance, but it may also take an objective form. Oppositions, calumny, attacks, persecution, misfortune of many kinds, adversary conditions and circumstances, pain, illness, assaults from men or forces. There too, the possibility of suffering is evident. There are two ways to meet all that. First, that of the self, calm, equality, a spirit, a will, a mind, a vital, a physical consciousness that remain resolutely turned towards the divine and unshaken by all suggestions of doubt, desire, attachment, depression, sorrow, pain, inertia. And Lord Sri Aurobindo says, this is possible only when the inner being awakens, when one becomes conscious of the self, of the inner mind, inner vital, inner physical, for that can more easily attune itself to the divine will, and then there is a division in the being as if there were two beings, one within, calm, strong, equal, unperturbed, a channel of the divine consciousness and force, and one without, still encroached on by the lower nature. But then the disturbances of the latter become something superficial, which are no more than an outer ripple, until these, under the inner pressure, fade and sink away, and the outer being too remains calm, concentrate, and unattackable.
सर्वस्तरतु दुर्गानि सर्वो भद्राणि पश्यतु सर्वः सद्बुद्धिमाप्नोतु सर्वः सर्वत्र नन्दतु सर्वेत्र सुखिनः सन्तु सर्वे सन्तु निरामयाः सर्वे भद्राणि पश्यन्तु मा कश्चित् दुःखमाप्नुयात्। ॐ नमो भगवते माहेश्वरी स्वाहा। एतत् पाद्यं श्रीमीरायै नमः।
Govinda
Lord Sri Aurobindo says, there is also the way of the psychic. When the psychic being comes out in its inherent power, its consecration, adoration, love of the divine, self giving, surrender, and imposes these on the mind, vital, and physical consciousness and compels them to turn all their movements Godward. If the psychic is strong and master throughout, if the psychic is strong and mastered throughout, then there is no or little subjective suffering, and the objective cannot affect either the soul or the other parts of the consciousness. The way is sunlit, and a great joy and sweetness are the note of the whole sadhana. Our Lord Sri Aurobindo says, as for the outer attacks and adverse circumstances, that depends on the action of the force transforming the relations of the being with the outer nature. As the victory of the force proceeds, they will be eliminated, but however long they last, they cannot impede the sadhana, for then even adverse things and happenings become a means for its advance and for the growth of the spirit, says our Lord Sri Aurobindo. Next subtopic, the right attitude towards difficulties. Under that, the subtopic, the sunlit path and the path of darkness. Our Lord Sri Aurobindo says, I don't believe in divine darkness. For us, the divine is peace, purity, wideness, light, and ananda. Peace is the very first thing that the yogins and the seekers ask for, and it was a quiet, silent mind that always brings peace, declared to be the best condition for realizing the divine. A cheerful and sunlit heart is the first vessel for the ananda, and who shall say that ananda or what prepares it is an obstacle to the divine union? Our Lord Sri Aurobindo says, I know perfectly well that pain and suffering and struggle and excess of desire or despair are natural, though not inevitable on the way. Not because they are helpless, but because they are imposed on us by the darkness of the human nature, out of which we have to struggle out into light. The dark path is there. Many hold it to be the unavoidable price of victory. It may be so under certain circumstances, as it has been in so many lives, at least at the beginning, or one may choose to make it. But then the price has to be paid with resignation, fortitude, or a tenacious resilience. After each victory gained over them, there is a sensible advance. Often they seem to show us the difficulties in ourselves which have to be overcome and say, here you must conquer us and here. But all the same, it is too dark and the difficult way which nobody should follow on whom the necessity does not lie. Our Lord Sri Aurobindo says, Where the divine grace is, whether believed or not, it will intervene. If you believe that hastens and facilitate things, it cannot yet believe. Still, the soul's aspiration will justify itself with whatever difficulty and struggle. And Lord Sri Aurobindo says, the sunlit way may be an illusion, though I do not think it is, for I have seen people treading it for years, but a way with only natural or even more moderate fits of rough weather, a way without typhoons, surely is possible. But the path needs to be cut by periodical violent storms, though it is so for a great many is an obvious fact. But even for these, if they stick to it, I find that after a certain point the storms diminish in force, frequency, and duration. That is why I insisted so much on your sticking. If you stick, the turning point is bound to come. I have seen some astonishing instances here recently of this periodicity beginning to fade away after years and the years of violent recurrence. Our Lord Sri Aurobindo says, these things are not part of the normal difficulties, however acute of nature, but special formations, tornadoes, which start and go on drilling round in the same circle till it is finished. In your case, the crucial point, whatever may have been the outward starting point, if any, is the idea or feeling of frustration in the sadhana. Once that takes hold of the mind, and all the rest follows. That again is why I have been putting all sorts of suggestions before you for getting rid of this idea, not because my suggestions, however useful and true, if they can be followed, are binding laws of integral yoga, but because, if followed, they can wipe out this point of danger. A formation like this is very often the result of something of past lives. The mother has seen it in yours, which prolongs a karmic samskara. To dissolve it ought to be possible if one sees it for what it is and resolve to get rid of it, never allowing any mental justification, however logical, right and possible. The justification may seem to be always replying to all mind's arguments or vital feelings of it. Anyway, the closing idea is the divine is worth fretting out, even if oceans of gloom have to be crossed. If you could confront the formations always with that firm resolution, it should bring victory. In the divine's mother vision, Kali did express a wish to interfere and break the thing. I don't know how she proposes to do it, by giving you the strength you pray for, or by breaking the head of the unwelcome lodger or the visitor. I hope she will soon do it. A possibility in the soul or the inner being remains always a possibility. At the worst, its fulfillment can be postponed, even that if the possessor of the possibility gives up or breaks away from the true spiritual path without probability of early return, because he is in the chase of magnified, distorted shadow of his own ego, or for some other distortion of the nature produced by wrong egoistic misuse of the yoga. A mere appearance of inability, obstruction of progress in the outer being, a covering of the inner by the outer, even if it lasts for years, has no probative value, because that happens to a great number, perhaps to the majority of aspirants in yoga. The reason is that they take somehow the way of raising up all the difficulties in their nature almost at the beginning, and the tunneling through the mass, instead of the ultimate way of going ahead slowly or swiftly and trusting to time, integral yoga and the force divine to clear out of them in the proper season what has to be eliminated. It is not of their own deliberate choice that they have to do it. Some in their nature drives them. There are many here who still have a long covering of the inner by the outer, separation of the inner from the outer consciousness. You yourself took that way in spite of your expostulations to you, advising you to take the sunlit road, and you have not yet got out of that habit. That means you won't get out of the tunnel. When you do, you will find your inner being waiting for you on the other side in the sun, not in the shadow. I don't think I'm more patient than a guru ought to be. Anyone who is a guru at all ought to be patient. First, because he knows the difficulty of human nature. Secondly, because he knows how the integral yoga force works. In the contrary, open or subterranean, slow or swift, volcanic or coralline, passing from one to another, and he does not use the surface reason, but the eye of the inner knowledge and the yogic experience, says our Lord Sri Aurobindo.